Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Epstein alleged Trump spent hours with one of his victims in emails released by the Democrats. The White House says it's an attempt to smear the president. Meanwhile, Trump says he has an obligation to sue the BBC over the way it edited a speech he made. And speculation over Keir Starmer's future as the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, as he insists his cabinet members are a united team. Now, US House Democrats have released new emails from Jeffrey Epstein which contain details about Donald Trump. They include an exchange between Epstein and his co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, from 2011, which detailed Trump spending hours with a redacted victim. The White House have accused the Democrats of creating a fake narrative and say the unnamed victim is the late Virginia Giuffre, who repeatedly said President Trump was not involved in any wrongdoing whatsoever. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster in Surrey and deputy editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray, who's in London for us. Isabel and Freddie, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Isabel, let's start with you. So first of all, these emails, they are pretty inflammatory. How did the Democrats get hold of the latest emails, and why are we only hearing about them right now?
Yeah, what an interesting development. I think this has probably caught the White House a little bit on the back foot. This morning, Trump woke up probably feeling rather pleased with himself that he'd exposed fake news within the BBC, and certainly a couple of heads rolling over here as a result of that. But what has actually happened is a sort of process in the United States. There is a committee that is responsible for holding the federal government and a number of government agencies to account. Now, it is Republican-led, but a number of Democrats within that committee had released these 3 emails today from the Epstein estate. Now, although it is Republican-led, they have a Democrat chair, and the chair has this overriding power of subpoena, which means that he can call witnesses without the permission and the votes of the committee and force them to give evidence. And it has moved the dial somewhat in this Epstein case. And so we have seen these 3 emails released by the Democratic members of this obscure committee, if you like, which we were expecting them actually to announce the end of the government shutdown today, but no one's talking about that now. And effectively, what it has done has led the Republicans to release a further 20,000 emails. And let me explain that a bit better, because the 3 emails, a lot of people are describing as something of a smoking gun. I'll let you be the judge of that, though, because in one of those emails, Epstein is writing to Trump's biographer, and he says that Trump was aware of all of the girls that Ghislaine was procuring. He makes that allegation quite clear. Now, obviously, Trump has always denied knowing anything about what was going on. And then in an email from the convicted paedophile to Ghislaine Maxwell, he also is quoted in this email as having as that Trump was the dog that hasn't barked, and Trump has spent hours with the name of the victim is redacted from that email at his house. Now, the White House have come out quite strongly, as I say, on the back foot, but they are denying that this is a smoking gun in any shape. They're describing it as a smear, as you said, Leigh-Ann, and they have claimed that the redacted name from that email was actually that of Virginia Giuffre, who, as we know, recently passed away. But she spoke at length in the past about how President Trump was never one of her abusers. So lots of confusion, lots of he says, she says. But at the moment, in real time, journalists are poring over these 20,000 or so emails to try and understand if there is some context to any of this, if Trump is on the hook for what we are learning today, because he's always claimed, didn't he, before he came into office, that he would release these Epstein files. Well, some people are saying effectively this is the Epstein files, and we're only just beginning beginning to get a sense, really, of what the repercussions will be.
Yeah, and as you did say, Isabel, there's so much to go through, and I'm sure every newsroom around the world is looking through what's been released today. But Freddie, the White House now says an external legal counsel has filed a lawsuit against the BBC. Could we see the BBC using taxpayer money to settle this with President Donald Trump? We've actually skipped a little bit of a beat there. That's my fault. Freddie, let's get back to the Epstein files. Can you tell me your thoughts on the Epstein files? I do apologise.
No need to apologise. It's all connected, so we can really talk about it all at any time, because it's all about Donald Trump, really, as so much of the news is these days. And I think it is a particularly interesting development. One of the interesting things about it is that Michael Wolff is involved in these details. Now, Michael Wolff has written a series of books about Donald Trump. The Trump administration has always repeatedly said that he's a sort of fantasist, that he's weaved together fact and fiction a lot. But one of the things he's said is that he's seen pictures of Trump that would be very, very embarrassing to him, to Trump, that is. And so it'll be interesting to see if this is just the beginning of a flood of emails and images of Trump in relation to Epstein, which are going to cause huge embarrassment for the Trump presidency. The White House is going to deny this till it's flat in the face, reject all these accusations. But the fact is this stuff is just going to keep hovering around, much as it did for the Duke of York or the Andrew, formerly known as Prince, as he's now called. And of course, with that story, Andrew did have a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. It was always a bit murky as to quite how close that friendship was. Trump has always insisted he did know him, but he didn't like him. They fell out quite early on. I think what Trump is embarrassed about, and this is why the FBI and the DOJ didn't release those, or probably why they didn't release the files earlier on, is because for all the Trump campaign's talk about releasing the Epstein files, they knew that there were going to be emails that people could use to tie Donald Trump to Epstein. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And the Democrats are very, very excited about this.
Yes, indeed. And you know what? I was just thinking about it because Freddie Isabel mentioned Prince Andrew there. Well, formerly Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Some of these emails that have been released today do name Andrew. They also name Peter Mandelson. So the Epstein files are just not going away when it comes to the US or the UK, are they?
Yeah, and Freddie talks about the Democrats being delighted about all of this. I think there'll be a number of Republicans who are extremely concerned about it as well, not least those core members of Donald Trump's MAGA base who elected him on the promise that he would, stand up to what is seen to be this elite that is beyond the realms of the judiciary and these super rich, super powerful people. And, this just speaks to all of that. And does, I think, and Freddie may disagree, but I think it does destabilise the president a little bit because there are those who have been relying on him to come up, and he stalled and he prevaricated. But today there isn't anywhere really further to hide. I think it is a huge embarrassment for President Trump. He is the Teflon president. We'll see what he says. He personally hasn't commented yet. I think he has a dinner in Washington this evening, but his press secretary is, as Freddie says, denying it and saying this is a smear campaign. All of this is rather unsatisfactory. And I always find it really interesting that in this case, it's actually British people only who've ever been convicted or held accountable. We're talking about Mandelson, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and Ghislaine Maxwell, all Brits, which I just think is so fascinating and also speaks to that thing that the MAGAs are all complaining about, that in the United States, if you're extremely rich and powerful, there is a sense that you can be above the law.
Yeah, and Freddie, if we just drill down a little bit into what Isabel said there about people in the Republican Party who could be concerned about this, Marjorie Taylor Greene has actually had a lot to say about it, and she's a Republican herself, and she almost linked the US shutdown to this Epstein situation we're now in.
Yes, indeed. What Marjorie Taylor Greene's doing at the moment is fascinating. And Trump's actually addressed this in recent days, saying he doesn't know what's gone wrong with Marjorie and so on. because she has been a very loyal Trumpist for a long time. And in recent weeks and months, she has started to criticize the Trump-Vance agenda on all sorts of things, economics being central to that. But she always goes back to this issue of the Epstein files, because for a lot of Trump voters, the Epstein files are this sort of neuralgic issue that symbolize everything that they regard as wrong with the global elite, the way politics has been run for too long. And it's what they hoped that Donald Trump would overcome. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is now, has said quite recently that she thinks one of the reasons the shutdown went on so long, why Washington was effectively sort of shut down, was to keep this story out of the news. That's a hell of a claim, might be quite hard to back up, but it certainly feeds into this kind of a lot of people call it paranoid, but it's certainly conspiracy theory minded thinking that goes on within MAGA, the Make America Great movement. And a lot of voters feel it. And when it comes to Donald Trump, because he's always been their hero, they're very conflicted about it. So this is why it's such a thorny issue for the White House, and why today, I think there's a press conference going on right now. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, will be very awkwardly batting away lots of questions about this.
Yes, well, she has just said that they think the vote will end the shutdown this evening, and that will happen. So she's been talking about that. But Isabel, I don't know what your thoughts are, because we've spoken a lot about Trump's MAGA base, and he campaigned and said, of course, I'll release these Epstein files, which has never happened. Pam Bondi never said we've got the list, never came to light. So many confusing parts to the story. Do you think maybe the Republican Party should just release the Epstein files and get ahead of this so they're not on the back foot the whole time?
Well, I mean, you're asking me as a journalist, and, I've always very much subscribed to transparency being, daylight being the greatest disinfectant. Just, if you've got nothing to hide, come clean. But, it just makes me deeply suspicious when people obfuscate. And, yes, of course, the Republicans should be demanding that everything's out in the open, obviously. And yes, they would be able to get ahead of what is ultimately a scandal. And the truth will come out. It always does.
Always comes out in the wash. Now, Freddie, let's move on to another story and another scandal, but it's happening with the BBC. And the White House now says that an external legal counsel has filed a lawsuit against the BBC. Could we see the BBC using taxpayers' money to settle this with President Donald Trump? I think this is the question many people in the UK are asking.
Well, it would be. Taxpayer money and licence fee payer money that would be used to settle it. Every time the BBC does have to do a payout, and it does happen from time to time that the BBC falls foul of a libel suit or something like that. I think the striking thing about that $1 billion suit that the Trump administration is filing is how comparatively small fry it is, in fact, compared to the $15 billion suit he's got against the New York Times and the $10 billion suit he's got against the Wall Street Journal. So in a way, it's perhaps surprising he went so low as just $1 billion. But it is nonetheless extremely awkward for the BBC, which prides itself on being this sort of globally prestigious news organization that stands up for impartiality and true news rather than fake news. They've been caught, they've exposed themselves, and it's been leaked, in fact. Editing footage of Trump that was obviously wrong. It was obviously a big slip up and a big mistake. I think what's quite interesting about it is the reason it's come out now is because of this internal inquiry within the BBC. And it's because there are people in the BBC who were appointed by Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister to try and sort of address the obviously metropolitan liberal, very anti-Trump bias in the BBC. And they have gone to war, effectively. There's a kind of knife fight going on within the organisation between people who are on the right of centre saying that this is a terribly left-wing organisation and people on the left who are saying there's a kind of right-wing coup going on with the BBC. And because the BBC is so intricately connected to the British establishment, it brings out all sorts of fights and venom into not just the BBC, but if you look at the British press this week, you'll see it everywhere. There's a sort of open, a quiet warfare that's come out in the open this week, and it's going to rumble on even since these resignations of senior BBC officials. It's going to rumble on.
So, Isabel, yes, we've seen heads roll at the BBC over that editing of that Trump speech in a Panorama documentary. And many questions are being raised. Is the BBC institutionally biased? This keeps coming up. Donald Trump has said that this could have been election interference. He's very unhappy with the way that the BBC behaved. But I want to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I think, no one can defend what was done on the Panorama edit. It was absolutely awful. And as a journalist, I'm absolutely amazed, to be honest, that they got away with that and that it wasn't picked up sooner, to be perfectly honest, by anyone, that it came out through a leak. I mean, we were all privy to the speech. It is quite shocking to me that it has taken so long to come to light. On the point about licence fee payers possibly having to pay this $1 billion lawsuit, I really, by the way, think that's just hugely unlikely. I think it feeds into Trump's kind of rhetoric. He likes to be seen to be taking on the media that he disagrees with. And he's often, as you've said, sued these media organisations in the United States. But, the statute of limitation in the UK is already expired. So he can't take legal action from this country. And if he is going to file a lawsuit in the United States, he's got a couple of months left to do that. But he has to be able to prove that the Panorama documentary actually aired in the United States in order to be able to do that as a number one obstacle to him actually successfully making the licence fee payer pay out. And there's no evidence at this point that the Panorama was being aired there. But also there are, enshrined in the First Amendment of the US Constitution, really strong US freedoms of the press. And, he as a president has done more, I would argue, than any previous president to try and undermine those in terms of, pushing out people from White House briefings that he doesn't like, asking questions, receiving questions only from people who are favourable towards him. And the hypocrisy of him turning around and accusing the BBC of in some way being institutionally biased, I can't let go. And that, I did used to work there, full disclosure, but it's been 15 years since I left. I also would point out that there's a big difference with the United States, that when these organisations that he's taken on in the past, they don't tend to see heads roll in the way that we've seen Tim Davie and Deborah Turner. I mean, those are really enormous scalps. For context, for people who aren't in the United Kingdom, and Tim Davie oversees the whole of the BBC. He's not the one just in terms of the news. That Deborah was the CEO of that, which in itself is an absolutely enormous worldwide operation. But Tim Davie sits on the board for everything, and those two scalps have gone. Now, that's a huge price to pay, but I think really for the BBC, the biggest price that they are paying is this, questioning now of their trustworthiness. And, they do remain the most trusted news organisation in this country. And I think that, that isn't something that will go as a result of this. I think people can see for themselves that this was an absolute lapse of judgment and a terrible mistake. And I hope that it doesn't do untold damage to the BBC, because I think that on the whole, more than any other media organisation, they do work incredibly hard to be impartial. And my final point on this really is just to say that I do think that a lot of the people that come out on the attack of the BBC the most are usually the ones who are themselves most flagrantly biased. So there's a bit of hypocrisy, not just from Trump, but from other media organisations in this country.
Isabel and Freddie, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And the Trump administration could refuse overweight foreigners from receiving a US visa, according to a leaked State Department memo. Those with certain medical conditions, as well as applications of retirement age, will have to prove they can support themselves without employment or reliance on public benefits. Isabel, let's go to you first. So, does Donald Trump have a really good point here? If you grant visas to those with health concerns, will that just cost the US way too much money? Or do you think in some ways maybe he's been a little bit harsh?
No, I absolutely think President Trump's well within his rights here. You know, as a leader of a country, you have to make a cost-benefit analysis, don't you, to anyone that you're letting into the country? What is this migrant visa going to bring us in terms of the economy, in terms of a job that it's going to fill, and what is it going to cost us? And I think it is a perfectly reasonable question to ask whether people with multiple problems linked to their weight will actually be a drain on the economy and therefore make all Americans poorer. He's not saying it about his own citizens. He's saying it about people that want to come in and live in his country. So I think it's fair. I think, you know, it might be harsh on the surface of it. And, you know, I'm all about compassionate politics, but, you know, we're living through economically difficult times. And, you know, I think it's a fair assessment for him. The one thing I would say, because you know me, I'm not going to always be generous to President Trump. I would say that if he was really public spirited in his kind of outlook in terms of public health, he would have taken a few other decisions towards his own nation, and I'm talking specifically about the appointment of Robert Kennedy as his health secretary. And he's also made some bizarre comments about things like Tylenol and its links to autism. I don't think he's necessarily a wonderful arbiter when it comes to matters of health, but I think on this one, I think it's a fair point.
So, Freddie, let's talk a little bit about this, because Donald Trump, this is not the first time that he's actually called out people for being fat. You remember, I think you and Isabel were on the show with me when he talked about fat troops. Do you think Donald Trump is just far too hung up on aesthetics? Or is he basically saying this is a genuine health concern?
He is very hung up on the issue of fatness. He talks a lot about fat shots or fat jabs, as he calls them, Ozempic, Mounjaro, those sorts of things. He's done that quite a lot in recent months. There was a large rumour, which has been refuted, that he was on the fat jabs himself. But he actually outed one of his advisors in public, which I'm not sure went down very well with all of his circle. He said, oh, Stephen, who's one of his comms people, he said, Stephen's on it, and pointed at Stephen, who was in the room, Stephen Chung, that was. I think it is interesting. I mean, as the most calorie challenged person on this panel, I'm not sure I quite go as far as Isabel, because what I find quite interesting is, you know, Trump can talk about deporting criminals, including sort of violent rapists and stuff, and forcibly deporting them. And there's quite a strong reaction to that. And then he says that we're banning fat people, and everybody says, oh, yeah, completely fair enough.
No, come on, Freddie. That's completely different.
It's completely different, and it's a facetious point. So I will not make it. I will retract it.
Okay.
But I do think it might be
I mean, we're not talking about deporting fat people. We're talking about barring them from coming in if they have comorbidities. And, you know, I think you've retracted it, so I shan't even point out its absurdity.
You're quite right. You're quite right. We'll move on. We'll move on. But I do think there is a connection between the fat shots, as they're called, and this policy, because the Trump administration is very keen to bring down the cost of Mounjaro and Ozempic in America. And they're looking at ways of doing that and federal ways of funding it. And obviously they're thinking we've actually got an extremely obese population in comparison with other countries. And therefore, we can't really be afford to be taking in more very fat people, because we've got quite enough very fat people all on our own. You
know, and Isabel, sorry, I was just going to say that's a good point that Freddie makes, because, you know, 40% of Americans are overweight, and that's compared to 16% of people around the world. It seems to be a huge difference. And like you did say, Donald Trump likes to talk a lot about the fat jabs. And I remember when he pointed out someone in his team, he said they've stopped working. I don't know what the point was there, but yeah, Donald Trump.
He's sort of saying, he said he knows lots of fat people that are on the jabs and he doesn't think they're any good. I mean, by the way, can we just start by talking about pot kettle leg? He's not exactly the supermodel, is he? And I think his previous White House medical reports have shown him to be obese, his BMI being over 30. But on the point about the cost to society of fat people in America, you're talking about 40% of Americans being obese. It actually increases when you get to the over 40s. I think it's almost 50%, almost half of Americans over 40 are obese. And that costs in terms terms of medical support per year, $173 billion. So, he's not idiotic to question whether bringing in more fat people is a good idea.
So, Freddie, I was wondering how on earth this could actually be put into place. You go to the States quite a lot. I don't know what your thought is about the weight of the people there, but will he put people on scales before and they will have to have their BMIs done? Sometimes Donald Trump says things that kind of make sense, but it's actually putting those wheels in motion to make it happen.
Well, you're quite right. I mean, there would be practical difficulties. I think it would be feasible to do it. But quite often these stories, they are deliberately put out by the Trump administration to get this sort of hysterical reaction of people saying, oh, my God, that's outrageous. And then most people, like Isabel, say, no, I think that's actually quite a reasonable policy. And that's probably what's going on here. I think an interesting thing about Trump and fatness, if you can bear with me, is on the fat jabs. It was quite interesting last year. Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, who was very influential in Trump world, and a few other MAGA people were trying to push this idea that Trump should apply pressure on Denmark to get Greenland, because Trump wants to annex Greenland, as everybody knows. And that one of the ways in which he might do this is by threatening to impose huge tariffs on Ozempic, which is owned by a Danish company. And that he would therefore be using America's obesity, which is, as we said, 40% an enormous problem, as kind of leverage in a strategic negotiation, which I think is the most Trumpy idea I've ever heard. And in its weird way, it's sort of brilliant.
Yeah, it's kind of enlightening, isn't it, when you put it like that? Novo Nordisk is, of course, that company, the Danish company who does make Ozempic and has been extremely successful. But Isabel, I just want to comment on the aesthetics of Donald Trump's team, because I think they're all good looking, they're all pretty slim. I know Donald Trump loves McDonald's and he has a Diet Coke button, but there is a point, isn't it, to having good looking people around you? It just keeps people interested.
Oh, I don't know, really. I mean, isn't the famous saying that politics is just showbiz for ugly people? No one expects their politicians to be attractive, really. I mean, maybe in the States, but I can't remember the last time we had an attractive politician. Is that unkind of me? Apologies to senior government in this country, but, there are more important things. And, personally, I think it's a sensible policy, but do we need to have attractive members of leading our country? No. No. I mean, it's great if they're attractive. It's an added bonus, isn't it? But it's not be all and end all.
Trump calls it central casting, and I think he has sort of figured out that essentially a lot of frontline politics now is just reality TV. And so having lots of attractive people suits his purposes. Whether it's right or not, I leave that to others to decide.
Well, he also, can we point out that he is an unhuman colour of orange? If he is really interested in aesthetics, there are some gaping errors in his own.
But Isabel, I actually...
A handsome man in his prime, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, Isabel, I actually read an article about how long it takes him to do that fake tan and that makeup and that bronzing. That's hours and hours of processing to happen each day and each evening. A lot of work goes into that look that he likes to maintain. That is actually a whole thing. He's got a whole team who make him look that colour, believe it or not.
No.
Well, stay. I'll say one thing. Pete Hegseth, attractive man. I like watching it when he does a speech, but we'll move on to another story now. Stay right there. And the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has spent the afternoon defending his relationship with his own cabinet members during today's PMQs. Today's grilling in Parliament follows rumours that British Health Secretary Wes Streeting was looking to challenge the Prime Minister for leadership. Streeting has denied the alleged plot, but that didn't stop the speculation, with the Prime Minister insisting his party was united. Take a listen.
Just last night, his allies accused not just the Health Secretary, but the Home Secretary and even the Energy Secretary of launching leadership bids. These attacks came from number 10, nowhere else, his toxic number 10.
And let me be clear, of course, Mr. Speaker, I've never authorised attacks on cabinet members. I appointed them to their posts because they're the best people to carry out their jobs. And that's what the Health Secretary is doing today, getting on with his job, and he's doing a very good job too.
The real scandal is that 2 weeks from a budget, the government has descended into civil war. Instead of fixing the mess.
So there we are, Freddie, a little bit of PMQs today. And I actually just want to say that I think Kemi Badenoch is upping her rhetoric as the Tory leader. She seems to have come out swinging today. But according to polls in the UK, Keir Starmer is one of the most unpopular prime ministers ever. So could there be any truth to the fact that a streeting takeover is actually possible?
Well, first of all, I think you're quite right to remark on Kemi Badenoch's improved performances. She's had a terrible start to her leadership, but a lot of Tories are getting quite excited now because she seems to be finding her feet in PMQs and so on. But there's no denying for Keir Starmer that he is extremely, extremely unpopular. Whether Wes Streeting is trying to orchestrate a devastating coup against the Prime Minister this week or anytime soon or just after the budget, which is coming up, is I think, doubtful. But there is certainly a lot of infighting, and Wes Streeting has always been seen as a very likely successor because he's able, he's more charismatic than the Prime Minister, he's more charming in interviews, and so on. The thing is, there's so many factions going on and so much hatred and backstabbing going on, you don't quite know what's going to happen. What is undeniable is that the British public are fed up with this government already. People are crying out for a general election or some sort of change, dramatic change. And the problem with the British system, particularly now we have Fixed Term Parliaments Act, is that we might not get another general election until 2029. Nigel Farage has said that he's always thought, or has said for some time, that he thinks this government is going to collapse. And there will be, because of that, a general election, perhaps in 2017, he said. I think people today are saying it might come about sooner.
And we do know that the Reform Party, which of course Nigel Farage leads, is leading in the polls. So if we do get a general election soon, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. But Isabel, what I find fascinating is Keir Starmer right now is fighting for his political life, but this all comes before the Chancellor's autumn budget, which is in just 2 weeks' time. It's not looking positive for the people who voted for Labour. They could break their manifesto commitments, which will be a huge blow, and things are just getting even worse. How can you be fighting for your political life at such a crucial time?
Well, because they lied to the electorate on their mandate, on their manifesto even. It was perfectly obvious to me that all of the parties and the Institute for Fiscal Studies said the same thing, that none of them were honest about what the public were going to have to face, which was unless we had significant growth, then we were going to have to see tax rises. Now, we've had a report out this week, which is from multiple institutions, which have come out showing the true cost of Brexit is more than we even thought, between 6 and 8% of GDP every year. And the cost of it is going to increase every year, not diminish. And the backdrop to that is that we have sluggish growth. We have people out of employment, higher levels of unemployment than in recent years. And unfortunately, that means the British public will have to pay more. And so they're going to break a manifesto pledge, which is why they're all infighting, because they're going to have to face up to the consequences of that. The Chancellor is simply doing the Prime Minister's bidding. The reality is, even if Wes Streeting or whoever it might be did replace Keir Starmer, without a general election, but, say, for example, he resigned and then there was a leadership contest, they would have the same problems. And unless you are going to elect a populist government, which is what ultimately Nigel Farage is leaning towards and wanting to promise, then, you're still lying to the public. You're not giving them honest answers to difficult questions. And I still don't see how else we can get ourselves out of this situation unless taxes go up, however unfortunate that is in 2 weeks' time.
Freddie, just a quick thought there, because I do think that Rachel Reeves and a lot of analysts have said this, and what I've watched watch. She's blamed everyone else but her fiscal rules that she's put into place, and she's set and determined to stick to. You know, we've seen her blame Brexit. We've seen her blame the Tories. Is half of the problem with Labour the fact that they just will not take accountability? They've been in power for over a year now.
Well, yes, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Tories are starting to get a bit of purchase with the electorate. But it's not really showing itself in the polls yet, but why they seem to be having a winning message at the moment, because the constant blaming of the Tories, well, everybody knows it's true. Other people say, well, no, hold on a second, you've been in power for a year now. Why is the country still in such a terrible state, and why are we going backwards? We are in what's called a doom loop. We cannot seem to get growth, and Rachel Reeves's policies seem to be making things worse, not better. So the only consolation for Keir Starmer at the moment is that while the Tories are brilliant at decapitating their leaders, because they're generally quite psychotic in the way they behave, Labour tend to be very, very bad at getting rid of leaders until the last moment. We saw this with Jeremy Corbyn, we saw it with Tony Blair. So I think the chances of a successful coup are lower just because Labour aren't very good at it.
Thank you so much for all your thoughts there. Now it's that time of the show where Isabel and Freddie have chosen two of their quirkiest stories of the day. And Isabel, I must admit, I absolutely love your story. Yours is about Kim Kardashian and why you should never listen to a psychic. Tell us more.
Yeah, mummy was always right. You know, these psychics are all out there just making money off people's insecurities. So Kim Kardashian has been trying for 6 long years to pass the bar exam in order to become a lawyer, and she's failed one more time. So on Saturday, as part of her mother's 70th birthday celebrations, a TikTok was put out with her on the phone to presumably one of her sisters, saying that they're all pathological liars. And I think she's quoted 4 or sought the advice of 4 different psychics, all of whom promised that she was going to pass the bar. So she's absolutely outraged. I think she also even blamed ChatGPT because she used their study tool and still managed to fail. So she's pretty unimpressed. But one big success story for the Kardashian clan is the surgeon. I mean, I can't believe Kris Jenner is 70. It was her party on Saturday. She looks younger, actually, than Kim Kardashian now, post-surgery. But anyway, they had this huge bash at Jeff Bezos' mansion in Beverly Hills on Saturday night. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were VIP guests, along with others like Adele, Mark Zuckerberg, and Oprah. I think our invites, Freddie, were lost in the post somewhere. Anyway, Kris Jenner had a photograph with the Duke and Duchess and posted it on her socials. Kim had one with Meghan and posted it on her socials. And then they've disappeared. They've all been taken down off their Instagram. So there's lots of eager beavers questioning, you know, why they don't even want to be associated with the couple. I think it's a bit harsh. If they're good enough to invite to the party and to be put on the grid in the first place, why would you take them down? I'm going to stick up for them on this one.
I must say something. The conspiracy theories out there, Freddie, about what happened to those pictures with Meghan and Harry and why the Kardashians deleted them is pretty wild. But basically, Hollywood royalty has deleted British royalty. This is not a good look for Harry and Meghan, is it?
No, it has been an ongoing theme with Harry and Meghan ever since they moved to Hollywood, that La La Land at first wanted to be friendly to them, was quite impressed, sort of saw them as shiny new objects that were quite fun to play with, but quickly got fed up with them. And there have been several instances of slights where Harry and Meghan have not been invited to things that they expect to be invited to. Celebrities have briefed out rather rude things about Meghan to the press. It seems for Harry and Meghan that they are not considered the creme de la creme in Hollywood, and I'm sure that grates with them very much.
And also, Isabel, yes, where did Kris Kardashian get that facelift? Because I think that was really the talk of the 70th party that we did see. It looks amazing. And Kim Kardashian said she now knows where to go in the future. So there we are.
She looks younger than her daughter. It's unreal how much that could change. Anyway, I still could never be brave enough to do something like that, but it is fascinating.
I would do it in a heartbeat. I always said, yeah, absolutely, no problem whatsoever. Freddie, let's move on to another story, actually. It links with faces. Tell us how to spot AI faces.
Well, I'm no good at spotting plastic surgery, and I think I'm actually getting worse at spotting an AI face. And there's a story today about advice being issued for how to spot AI faces, because it's actually quite a serious problem that's developing, that people are increasingly unable to spot them. And in fact, they are now more likely to say a human face is AI generated than they are with the better versions of an AI face. And what's odd about it is that I think not so long ago, it was very easy. You know, you watched an AI video, you could tell it was AI. And already the machines are getting so much smarter, so much faster, that it's becoming harder and harder and harder. And in a couple of years, a few years, it will be indistinguishable from reality, or even, as this report says, we might be entering a sort of hyper-real phase where computer-generated reality is more convincing to human eyes than actual reality itself. So it's a bit daunting, but there are still apparently ways in which you can spot an AI-generated face, and that's still to look at the teeth. The AI hasn't got teeth very well, but in all these images you're showing, I can't see any teeth. So it's also hairline. Apparently hairlines are suspiciously unreal, and ears. It's not very good at ears still. But I'm not sure that that's going to be very true for much longer.
It's absolutely fascinating, because when I look at these images, it is difficult to tell the difference. And I don't know about you, Isabel, but sometimes I feel like we didn't grow up when we were younger with the AI generation that we see now. And it's how do you make sure that children know what to spot as different, or teenagers? Because I often wonder how difficult it must be for young girls looking at these images, thinking, how do we live up to that standard when it's not even real?
Well, whether it's AI or a facelift, there's always that pressure. And personally, I'd much rather AI my face than have a surgeon doctor it. So, you know, there are some, you know, it's less painful, less expensive just to use AI. And, you know, it is awfully sinister sometimes when you worry about it being used to frame politicians or criminals for things that they haven't actually done. But the upsides of AI imagery, I mean, I don't know if you've got the latest iPhone, for example, but I'm able to remove stuff or people from photographs that, you know, family photographs, or I can add in members, you know, to a photograph. There are upsides to it. So I refuse to be too doom and gloom about it all. I personally would rather have an AI face than a facelift. There we go.
Oh, no, but you know what? I also think it's quite difficult now, because there's so many different filters that, you know, you can take a picture of yourself and your skin immediately looks better. Freddie, I don't know what you think of the filters.
Well, I think I probably need to find some better ones, looking at myself in various pictures. But I do think that, I mean, imagine, we talked about a Trump cabinet being all about looks and having the most handsome. Imagine a futuristic cabinet where it was all just AI-generated faces, and how terrifyingly attractive that could be.
I don't know what to say to that, Isabel. Any thoughts?
I don't know what to say to that either. I mean, there's quite a long way to go for, I think, British politicians to look attractive. Is that really harsh? They're going to need quite a lot of AI in the government before Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are going to get hearts fluttering.
I was actually...
that, Freddie?
I said, you're so down on British politicians.
Oh, sorry. Well, you know, it's the Americans that are supposed to be all aesthetically pleasing, isn't it? With their shiny teeth and big hair and I don't know.
That's true. That's undeniable.
Turkey teeth. But I was also just thinking of a good-looking British politician. We were talking about him. Wes Streeting, I think some people would class as a handsome Englishman in the British politics. I don't know. Isabel, maybe?
No, not for me. I'm trying to think who's an attractive British politician, and I'm struggling. Freddie, can you think of any?
Richard Tice.
Oh, was that Goldsmith? He was rather handsome, but he's long gone, isn't he? He's in the Lords now.
He was very handsome. Richard Tice?
Of the Reform Party.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Man, yeah.
He's tall, he's handsome, he always has a nice suit on, very sporty. Yeah, we'll give it to Richard Tice. Thank you so much. Thanks to tonight's guest, broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joined us from Surrey, and deputy editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray, who's in London. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. G&T with Tom Birds's Watson will be coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.